Hello, this is John Haller from Fellowship Bible Chapel. What follows is an Israel update, an interview that I recorded today with Avraham Levine of the Alma Research and Education Center in Israel. I think you'll find the interview a highly informative and incredible guest with a lot of knowledge about what's going on in Gaza and the north of Israel. Avraham is with the Alma Research and Education Center in Israel. His bio is in the description, along with 3 articles that I would recommend. One from Alma by Yaakov Lapine. Also an article that he wrote that's been published just within the last overnight. This is being recorded on March 21st. Yaakov Lapine also wrote an article that's been published at jns.org, and then also an article by Jonathan Spire and another author that's been published at the Middle East Forum. I think these are all incredibly important articles to read, particularly with regard to the situation in the North, and I trust that you'll enjoy this interview with Avraham Levine of Alma. I think it's one of the most important and informative interviews that I've ever done. As always, like, share, and subscribe on our YouTube channel, and thank you for listening. So I'm with Avraham Levine. He lives in the Golan, and you serve in the IDF, and you went into you've been into Gaza. Tell us again what. We were just talking a little bit about it. Tell us what you experienced when you go into Gaza. So just so you know, I went to the Urban Warfare Training Center down in the South, and they have built a mock-up of Gaza. They have some tunnels, they have buildings, they have mosque and that sort of thing. And I'm sure you've been there, you've been through the training there, but how does that compare to really what's in Gaza? Is it even comparable to what you faced in Gaza?
We usually, the figure we usually use is that the training is about 50%, 15% of what really will happen in battle, mainly because someone's firing at you. But in this case, it's really different. The fact that that they can pop out from anywhere under your feet because it's sand, and there's kilometers upon kilometers of underground, a whole project that basically they literally did this to us. Our soldiers were surprised after 2 weeks being in the same place, and a guy climbed out of the floor and threw out 2 bombs. And that's in an area that, according to the world and Wikipedia, is completely controlled by IDF. So when you see the map of Gaza and it's marked IDF took care of Bet Hanun and took over Jabalia and is in Shifa and is Gaza and now is working in Khan Yunis, it's all over the ground. That doesn't mean we control the underground. The situation there of when you combine urban warfare with human shield, with underground, a whole underground project, a network of tunnels that can be used at any given moment, makes it really slows down any military movement, and that's what's taking so long. It's not that they're beating us, because if you ask anyone in uniform, which I'm not, I'm a civilian right now, but if you ask anyone in uniform, he says we're doing fine. We're advancing all the time. We're finding more and more tunnels. We're killing Hamas when they try to surprise us, because you don't see them all the time. Days go by and nothing happens. And then a guy picks up from the floor or in an apartment that you were just in there, comes out with an RPG, shoots an RPG, and disappears. That's the tactic that we're seeing. They have surprise element, and they have the ability to maneuver and surprise us from places that you didn't expect.
In other words, they know where the tunnels are and you don't.
And it's impossible to find because they don't open the tunnels. It's not that I overlooked a hole in the floor. It's that in a place that there was no hole in the floor, 2 feet down, there is a tunnel. And to open that at any given moment, middle of the night, middle of the day, climb out, throw a bomb, and collapse down inside and run away is pretty easy.
I mean, I assume that there are engineering groups and that type of thing that are mapping out the tunnels as you find them. But what we've seen in the media here is they thought maybe a couple hundred miles of tunnels. Now they're using numbers like 500 or 600 miles of tunnels. Does that seem to be accurate?
I think it's all assumptions. I wouldn't take that number. Not that I don't trust the guy making the assumption, but I'm saying it's an assumption. He's calculating in this area we got this amount, so let's multiply that by the rest of the ground, the lay of the ground, and see what number we reach. We do not have a good way to find the tunnels, to ruin the tunnels, and right now it's a slow movement. It's working all the time, every day, every night. There's hundreds of soldiers as we speak doing exactly that same thing. But when you allow them 15 years of build whatever you want and bring in and send in materials, and everyone there is part of this project. Because when you look at the tunnels, and I don't know what your association when you hear about a tunnel in Gaza, but if you don't look and follow the news, you're thinking of a Shawshank Redemption, Tim Robbins climbing out of the sewage. Mm-hmm. There's tunnels there, and you see electricity, lights, running water. They're prepared food, water, air vents. That sometimes we find the air vent before we find the real exit or entrance to the tunnel. So hundreds of people, thousands of people, professionals, construction workers were part of this. Everyone has some kind of attachment to these tunnels. They're under the ground. There's entrances from houses, from civilian areas, and now we're uncovering bit by bit, foot by foot, every bit of this infrastructure that will allow them to rebuild themselves if ceasefire now happens.
So, for example, there was a lot of controversy early on in the Gaza about Al-Shifa Hospital, big hospital in Gaza. And am I correct? It's hard to keep up with the media reports, but they killed 150 terrorists in that area just yesterday or the day
just
before?
In the past, yes, just in this current attack, not in the first one. In the first phase, months ago, we already entered there. But Shifa is in the middle of Gaza, and it's well-documented connections under the ground to multiple buildings around there. So it's really easy, definitely before we got in there, because ambulances and trucks and buses are in and out of the parking lot. And even after we were there, once you leave a building, it's not clear anymore what's in the building. And essentially, if you're not going to hold on to every building in Gaza, you have to place, every time you step back into a room, you recheck it because it has an underground connection or a connection from the outside or from the floor above.
So I want to make sure I understand this. So Al-Shifa Hospital was pretty much cleared. They went through there, they cleared it out, and now here we are a couple of months later, and all of a sudden there's a fight, and there's hundreds of my understanding is hundreds of prisoners taken from under the hospital and 150 terrorists killed. And it's like they've rebuilt while Israel's supposedly occupying Gaza.
Exactly. The perception of you're in control when you only see what's over the ground is the wrong perception. We have to realize, and I think there's two narratives now at the same time that are completely parallel. If you ask civilians all over the world, they're saying Israel is in control. Israel is in a terrible condition. They're not accomplishing their goals. If you ask the military people around the world, I think they're studying what we're doing right now in Gaza as how is Israel keeping the numbers so low under these circumstances? Because the American assumptions before we went into Gaza were way worse in terms of the number of soldiers killed and civilians killed if we go into Gaza on the ground.
Yeah. Avraham, when I was watching this, and I've been following, and I've done some work with the Amir Avivi over at the Israeli Defense and Security Forum, the numbers that I saw floating around from various intelligence and military assessments were that if Israel went into an operation in Gaza, they would quickly lose 15 to 20,000 IDF soldiers dead. And the numbers are, I mean, it's almost miraculous. I mean, I think between it's like 600 total, and that includes what was killed on October 7th, if I understand that correctly.
It's around 250 since October 7th. And, well, the truth is that it's pretty easy to explain. The truth is that if you take the numbers post October 7th, post the atrocities that Hamas surprised us October 7th in the morning, and you look at the numbers from October 8th, 9th, 10th, up to today, 5 months, it's really easy to see who put soldiers and weapons and arms in front of their civilians and who put civilians in front of their soldiers and arms. Because you see, in Gaza, Hamas is using civilians as human shield, and we're putting soldiers in front of our civilians. And that's why our civilians are safe since October 7th, and their civilians are not, because they're being used and manipulated and sacrificed for political advantage.
But it's still true that the ratio of civilian dead to military terrorist operatives dead is maybe as low as in any war in human history.
Exactly. Because we're not. If we would have gone in the concept, in the mind of we're going to ruin everything, then you'd hear of hundreds of thousands of people killed every day. Because if we just carpet bombing is a phrase that I hear being used, that would be way worse. I mean, if you follow any war, open Wikipedia. There's a Wikipedia ratio, combatant civilian ratio in wars or something. And it's usually 1 to 10, 1 to 7, 1 to 12, or a long history. And here we're speaking of, in the worst case scenario, if we, for some reason, decide that we're believing Hamas reports, and there's 30,000 civilians killed, there's 10,000 soldiers, Hamas soldiers out of the 30,000, that's 1 to 2. That's 5 times better than the biggest, worst wars. And we're talking, again, urban warfare in a heavily populated area.
I mean, I don't think people understand. Like I said, I've only had a little bit of experience with the Urban Warfare Training Center, but first of all, that training center is one of the most unique places in the world for urban warfare. People come from all over the world to train there. But I don't think people understand the density of the population, and every corner, every window, every closet in every building becomes a potential point of attack that you have to deal with.
Now, I'll make another point that might be controversial, but I think we shouldn't be hiding and burying our heads in the sand again. You know what else they find in every house in Gaza? A map of all of Palestine. Everyone in Gaza has a map, and it includes all of Israel. All of the people there assume they own Israel. They should be in my home. I'm not claiming they're all military. I'm not claiming they're all Hamas, although surveys say Hamas is still heavily popular and will probably win elections if they're brave enough to try again to try elections. That's the same in Judea and Samaria, sadly. So right now, despite the atrocities, rape, decapitation, hostages held for months, still we see a very large population supporting all these atrocities as resistance. And we see the same around the world. And I think that is a very sad fact that we have to live with and think about. How is the world supporting an organization that's not even claiming that didn't happen? It's their videos that we have. It's them attesting to their glorious victory when they're fighting men, women, and children, civilians, against all international law, against all morals, and the whole world is supporting them. And anti-Semitism is even growing.
Well, I can only tell you my own personal experience is that for example, my Twitter feed or X feed is filled with the most vile, anti-Israel, anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic propaganda lies. It's like a sewer every time I open my Twitter feed, every day. It's like they're trying to persuade me that what I'm seeing is not what I'm seeing. And I'm sure you're seeing the same thing.
I'm seeing the same thing. And as a resident of the North, and as someone that is following closely Lebanon, Syria, Iran, here in the North, and assuming that this can become way worse, because everything in Lebanon is more complicated. More Hezbollah, more weapons, more accurate weapons, longer time. Again, human shield with a supportive civilian population. Everything becomes more complicated.
So I want to take what your experience was in Gaza. Let's translate it to the North. And we were talking a little bit before we started recording about, 60, 80,000 people or whatever evacuated from the North, the effect on the economy, no tourism in the Golan. And this is the high tourist season. Maybe, as you said, the best time to come to the Golan, and there's nobody there. It impacts the economy. People are leaving, and they don't know when they're going to return. And I've seen Sarit interviewed a number of times, and she just says, we cannot safely return to the North. In one interview, I said, she said it was every other or every third home in southern Lebanon had a direct connection to Hezbollah.
That's a quote of someone that's a quote from someone in Lebanon. That's a quote from them being proud and saying it. That's a quote of a mayor in South Lebanon, in a Shiite town, that when UNIFIL, the UN force that is supposed to eliminate Hezbollah's presence in South Lebanon, when he said, do you know this place, a shack, is used by Hezbollah? He said, this one? Every third house here in my community is owned by Hezbollah. What are you talking about?
Well, so we have the situation, and I think the fear was that what happened in the Gaza region on October 7th was really more likely to happen in the north from Hezbollah with the tunnels that they've built, often through bedrock. Compare the two. Compare what you found in Gaza with what assumptions are made about what's in Lebanon, and have those assumptions changed since the experience in Gaza?
Hamas has way less weapons in terms of artillery. So I see a barrage of, right now, Hezbollah is containing themselves at their choice to the northern front, and they completely paralyzed those areas, and we evacuated them. Hezbollah has the ability to completely paralyze most of Israel in many ways, days and days and days and weeks. And Iron Dome, this magical, mythical weapon that we created, is not a real Iron Dome. It's batteries that are spread. And my house is not necessarily defended by Iron Dome because I don't live in a strategic place. I don't live by an airport. I don't live by Haifa Harbor. I don't live by Tel Aviv or in Jerusalem. So why would I be defended by Iron Dome? It's a strategic weapon. And when Hezbollah decides to start bombing all of the northern part of Israel, bombing Tel Aviv, between Netanya and Ashdod, the whole coast, using Syria as another point of attack, using the Houthis as another point of attack, that's one thing that we're concerned with, artillery. And the second thing is what you brought up. What if they decide to step up their game and try another October 7th invasion? Because the ones who invented this plan are Hezbollah, not Hamas. The ones who started training attack units against Israel are Radwan, Hezbollah, not Hamas. Hamas copycat is a copycat and a student of Hezbollah, and way lower in the food chain of proxies from Iran.
So what do you think is, we could talk a very, very long time, and I appreciate so much the time you're taking to talk to us today. What do you think is going to happen in the North? What needs to be done? And when? I mean, everyone wants to know, is something going to happen? When's it going to happen? How long will it take? Just sort of give us your assessment or Alma's assessment of what's involved.
Well, what has to be done and what I think will happen are very different questions, or I have two very different answers.
Okay.
I think what might happen, and is very concerning to me, is that if we do reach an agreement with Hamas and give up many interests and wishes and goals in order to bring back 134 hostages, and Hamas does stop attacking currently, then my guess is Hezbollah will join the plan too, not even officially. And when Hezbollah stops shooting, the world will completely disagree with any aggressiveness from our side. Completely forgetting, the world will completely forget the fact that for 5 months, 60,000 people are out of their homes living in hotels with no schools, kindergartens, or work. The world won't care if these 60,000 people are coming back or not. The world will say Hezbollah didn't attack for 4 days already. What are you concerned with? And we'll start hearing all these Middle East research and specialists saying, oh, Hezbollah has no intention to go to war. Really? You're brave enough to make that assumption after we all said that before October 7th in the South? And people are still brave or stupid enough to make assumptions that I have to count on and my safety counts on? So that's what I'm concerned with. What if everything just fizzles out and the threat stays in front of us? What I think must happen is we have to create deterrence. And that has to happen either with a very heavy ground maneuver into Lebanon, or in an agreement that has a very strong side of how do we enforce this, which we never had. How do we enforce? How do we eliminate the threat of Hezbollah in the north? How do we thwart any idea, any plan before it comes out? Because we don't want to be surprised again.
Can I answer your question? You mentioned that every home in Gaza has a map of Israel, with no Israel, by the way, probably.
Exactly.
Do you suspect that the homes in southern Lebanon have similar maps? No?
No, they don't. They're Lebanese. They call us Palestine Muhtalla. we're occupied Palestine. Or if you want to be specific, I'm in occupied Syria, but the rest of Israel is occupied Palestine.
Okay.
So in their eyes, it's Palestine. And that's why they're not fighting for it. That's why Hezbollah did not sacrifice their people on October 7th. Because they're not really fighting for Israel. Hezbollah's real target is Lebanon. Iran wants to take over Lebanon. And they're doing a pretty good job as we speak.
And they also want to take over southern Syria?
Of course. And they have in many ways. Because when you hear that the Syrian army that I was trained in basic training to fight against, because it was the only military organization, official organization, that Israel thought we'd ever fight. Syrian army, not that it doesn't exist, but that's not the threat from Syria. The threat from Syria is Hezbollah, Shiite militias from Iraq, from Syria, from Afghanistan, from Pakistan, all these proxies that Iran put in place in order to put other people in front of Iran. Iran's not fighting on their ground.
Right.
They took all the battles to different places, and they'll fight till the last drop of Palestinian blood, till the last drop of Lebanese blood. They're not fighting with Iranian blood.
So what would a war in the north look like if it occur? I don't personally, I don't see how it does not occur, but if it does occur, what's it going to look like in the north? What's it going to look like for Israel?
For Israel, it will be, my guess is, fairly long time that Israel is paralyzed in terms of economy, in terms of the northern harbors, in terms of any movement. And we'll have to, it will be a sort of a military control of at least the whole North, Galilee and Golan Heights, and a lot of cities in Israel. I cannot see a war in Lebanon and kids going to school. I do not see any tourism. I do not see, this is small land we have here.
Right.
The northern front from east to west is 42, 43 miles.
Well, for example, how far do you live from Damascus? Probably 50 miles?
35, 40 miles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we don't really have a grasp of that. And Beirut's not even that far away.
Exactly.
So there's all this talk about, we'll just enforce Resolution 1701 that has been in place since 2006, UN resolution. And that's not been enforced, has it? Nobody's implemented 1701, right?
What's the saying about doing the same thing twice and expecting a different outcome?
I think that's sort of the definition of insanity.
I want to say that because people are listening to us all around the world, and I guess there are places around the world that all you have to do is lower the fences and put your weapons down, and that's called peace. And today you can drive from one European country to another, and there is no border. But here in Israel, if you don't put a tank by your house, you'll be attacked. If you do put a tank by your house, you won't have to use the tank. And the sad truth is that in Gaza, we lowered our fences. We lowered the number of soldiers. And Hamas recognized that and took advantage of that. And what we can't let that happen, we just can't let that happen. The more weapons we have, the better we train, the less we'll have to use the soldiers and weapons.
Is the war in Gaza being used to send a message to Hezbollah that we will turn southern Lebanon into what Gaza looks like? Is that part of the process that's going on?
That's not the reason for the war, but that is one of the consequences that I hope happens. In a sense, I hope, and I know Hezbollah are following. We see what happens when powers leave a region, I'm not pointing fingers today. I don't want to offend people on the other side of the ocean. But when there's less weapons, less ships in the region, then the area doesn't only reverse back to where it happens, things worsen. And when the greatest powers in the world are not taking part and not taking a clear side, and are leaving this to Israel to deal with this on her own, in a sense. I'm not speaking only Gaza or Hamas, but if Israel is singled out, confronting Iran, which is the source of all the proxies, will still win. It will take a little longer, and more people will die on the way on both sides. But I think if you want to be part of the right side in history, you have to recognize Iran's not only our enemy. Iran calls the whole West the enemy. They put America, the Houthis have death to America before death to Israel. Why am I still being attacked from the south? Iran puts weapons not only in Syria and Lebanon, Iran puts weapons in Russia against Ukraine. So Europe is threatened by Iran. I'd like to see Europe joining the effort. Iran sends the same UAVs, weapons, to Venezuela as well. Venezuela is in range of the United States. And the same airplane that lands in Damascus and Beirut flies also to Caracas, Venezuela. So I think we should recognize there's two alliances, and we should hold our alliances close together, because ours is a little weaker currently.
So I want to ask you a few questions. Believe me, we could go for hours because I have a lot of questions, but there's a couple recent articles, one on Alma, one over at JNS by Avraham Levine. I don't know if I'm saying his name correctly, about some concern about Russia presence along the Syrian border and working with Iran. And can you just tell me what your observation is, and what the threat really is there?
I'll tell you what changed and what always has been. Russia was always in Syria. And since 2015, they're heavily in Syria, helping Assad and basically saving him from losing his position and life. There's nothing new about that. What changed is that Russia, for the past few years, basically allowed Israel to attack Syria, or more, to be more accurate, to attack Iran in Syria and slow down this effort of accurate weapons into Syria and Lebanon. And what's happening now in the past 2 years, because of the war in Ukraine, is that Russia is developing a dependence and reliance on Iran. And once that happens, that means that Iran will have full support of Russia, which makes it even more clear on what side Russia is, because Russia always plays all sides. We'll be friends of Israel and of Turkey and of Syria. And at the same time, we'll support Syria against the rebels that are supported by Turkey. We'll support Turkey. We'll work with Israel. And now I think we're reaching a point that Russia might be more clear about what side they chose, making it again an East and West fairly clear mark of who's against who in the current conflict. And again, Israel-Hamas is just a small chapter in the Iran conflict against the West.
So is there observable increase of Russian activity in, say, the Golan area of Syria? I mean, what's going on?
Rebuilding of infrastructure, of positions, of Russian positions. We hear once in a while about flights flying over the border closer than they used to, which is not a concern. That's not a threat. It's a declaration. We're here. We're here to stay. It's a symbol. But we see more people. And depending on what happens in Ukraine, I think that's what will eventually cause how many people, right? How many fighters, how many whatever comes here from Russia. Even Wagner Group was here before they went to Ukraine. Now, I don't know where they are currently, their situation, but that's just an example of there's two fronts right now. So Russia's still pretty low here in terms of military presence, but they're rebuilding. They're here to stay.
Now, there were some reports that Russia had taken like some of their, I don't know if they ever put any S-400 positions in Lebanon or Syria, but certainly some of the S-300 assets were moved to Ukraine theater. Do you see Russia reintroducing those air defense assets in Syria or Lebanon?
I think their policy is keeping the S-400s for themselves. They're still keeping the proxies. Remember, this is not a real hierarchy or one real interconnected. It's common interests. So they're keeping a level of they're holding on to S-400s, S-200s, everyone can have. S-300s depends how close you are to Russia. So if there are S-400s or SAM-400s, I think they're called in the States, it would be defending Russian assets and infrastructure, airports, harbors that Russia is holding on to in Syria.
So are you saying that as the belief is that as the war in Ukraine may wind down, that things may increase in Lebanon, Syria with regard to Russian influence?
Yeah, I definitely think that's one of the main options that can happen, yes.
Why would, and so, you know, somebody who lives in the West, who I think understands the Iranian threat pretty well, but why is Russia so warm and open? I mean, they had all these Hamas and Fatah and other people meeting in Russia just within the last couple of weeks to sort of make sure they could present a unified front. I mean, why is Russia doing that?
Well, remember, there was a perception for some time, more at the beginning of the war in Ukraine, that the whole world is against Russia. And I think it's time everyone understands it's not the whole world. There's Europe and United States and Israel. And even you can add to this alliance in many ways, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, maybe Jordan and Egypt in a sense. And there's another alliance. And in that alliance, Russia heavily depends on Iran. And Iran's plan is to use proxies. So Russia, friend of your friend, right? And a friend of your, so that's just what you're seeing here. Hamas is working under Iran, supported by Iran. That's Russian weapons in a sense. Russian support in a sense, not direct. We're not saying that right now. But they're showing Iran what side they're on. I think it's virtue signaling to Iran more than anything else.
So in Mr. Lepine's article at Alma and then again at JNS that was just posted last night, he cites a retired Israeli security officer,
Yaakov Nagel.
Yeah. And he was sort of I don't know if he's floating an idea or this is what he believes, is that Iran is using the distraction of Gaza and the distraction of these. And I have the Red Alert app. It goes off all the time in the north. I mean, you know, there's 100 rockets some days or 35 rockets or missiles or anti-tank artillery. You know, it goes off all the time. And Israel responds. I mean, there's thousands, I think, of missiles and attacks that have been exchanged in the north, and we don't even hear about it. It's hardly in the news. But so Iran is using Gaza and this sort of evolving situation in the north as a cover to develop its weapons. I think the term he used, they're using weapons of mass distraction in the Israel area to mask what they're doing with regard to weapons of mass destruction within Iran.
The question that he's really answering, and that is not in the article, is the question of why didn't Hezbollah take the opportunity and attack the same time with Hamas? That's the big question, because IDF was completely split October 7th, sending half of the reserve to the north, because the assumption was this is our weakest point of time. So this is an opportunity for Hezbollah, for Iran to attack. And the big question is, why didn't they attack? And that's what we're trying to answer. Another question that we're trying to answer is, why did Hamas attack to begin with? Because we were all assuming they're getting money from Qatar. Bibi is allowing this to happen. There's thousands of workers from Gaza working in Israel, bringing a nice salary back into Gaza. Things are coming in from Egypt. Why would they go to war? And these two questions, Yaakov Nagel is trying to answer with an interesting theory that I'm not saying I buy it 100%, but it's plausible. If Iran wants to distract the world from their main goal currently, right? The main goal that they see months ahead, a year ahead, 18 months, 24 months ahead, is reaching the ability to use a nuclear bomb, putting them around a very small table of important countries around the world, powerful countries that have to be dealt with in a different way. They want to join that club. And if everyone is focused on them militarily, sanctions, slowing them down, international sanctions, UN, then it works. It slows them down. It doesn't stop them, but it slows them down. But if everyone's distracted and busy with Israel is doing this, and Israel is doing that, and Hamas did this, and Hamas did that, and Hezbollah is this, Hezbollah that, no one's speaking about Iran right now. And no one's looking at Iran, and no one's stopping them of speeding up the process of weaponizing the enriched uranium, which they pretty much already have.
So, two questions. I'm an American, so I'll have to answer, we'll have to answer for what our government seems to be doing with backing off on sanctions with Iran in the terms of billions of dollars, letting them sell billions of dollars of oil, not interdicting that in any way. But you're in the neighborhood, and we're the ultimate target, but you're the first one. And so what can Israel do right now? Let's just say that our elections go a certain way in the current administration, which I have referred to as the Biden administration for obvious reasons, I think. And as to who's maybe running the show, we certainly don't have a president who's capable of doing it. But if Israel doesn't get support from the U.S., what does Israel do? Can they do to shut down the Iranian program for weapons of mass destruction?
Well, what we've been doing for the past few years, and we might have to speed that up when we're back and have our hands free from doing other things, is what IDF refers to as war between wars. And what we're essentially doing is, or a campaign between wars. So something a little under a war. And what we're essentially doing is we're hitting, and Bennett, when he was prime minister, spoke about it openly, that this campaign between wars that we officially have in Syria is not contained only to Syria. And according to other publications around the world, there have been people attacked in Iran. And electricity and bugs and all of this is not a solution. We're not stopping Iran, but we are able to slow them down. And I think that's what Israel is trying to do, to slow them down and buy time. Because as long as we're here on our own, we're having trouble eliminating the threat completely. So we're slowing it down and waiting for a better opportunity to hit the project out of the court.
As an Israel advocate, what do you think the world needs to do with regard to I don't know what else to call it other than the head of the snake? How does that need to be dealt with, do you think?
If a country calls for a destruction of another country and calls for the death of Israel and is trying to reach a nuclear weapon, then first of all, I want the whole world to recognize that. Because if I still hear that Israel is the greatest enemy of the world and the worst country in the world, when we have a country that's declaring this daily of what they're planning to do against Israel and is supporting terrorist organizations that are recognized across the world in many countries, Hezbollah, Houthis, and yet Iran is not stopped, then Israel is singled out. And I think the whole world has to recognize that Iran is an agent of chaos and terror that will threaten the whole world peace. The reason an American ship came into the Mediterranean after October 7th was not to defend me. It was to make sure that Iran doesn't attack. And that's too little and too late to stop Iran completely. So that it's just not enough. And Israel does not call for other armies to help us in our battlefield. We get a lot of support from U.S. My weapons were American. I completely recognize that and thankful. My gun said U.S. government property on it. The anti-tank missile that I used to train with was a TOW manufactured in U.S. The armed vehicles were American armed vehicles that I used. Older ones, but American vehicles. Yet Americans were never deployed to fight our battles. Not in 48, not in 56, not in 67, which is obvious because U.S. was less of an ally then. But even when we got closer, 73, 81, 2006, U.S. did not deploy soldiers to fight our battles. So I don't ask that easily. But Iran is not an Israeli enemy. They're an enemy of the West. The flags burnt in Iran are Israeli and American and British. So I think when you see your flag being burnt and declarations being made, death to Israel, I could send you videos of funerals in Lebanon of Hezbollah members, and it's Maut el Israel, death to Israel, Maut el America, death to America. And yet there's still Iranian NGOs, Shiite organizations that are cover-ups for terror all around the world, in Europe and in the States.
Well, I appreciate that. This has been incredibly informative. I apologize for going over our time a little bit. I just have two more questions. One, and you can give a very truncated answer to the one, because it's not one that I brought up. And I'm sitting here looking at the map behind you and the threats that Israel faces on all sides, the multiple fronts. Do you have any? There's been a big shift in how Turkey is acting since October 7th. Well, even before that, but Erdogan, do you see them being involved in this thing at all at the moment?
I wouldn't go visit Turkey if I'm an Israeli or a Jew. I wouldn't go visit Turkey. Not that because I'm concerned of Turkey hitting on me, but I'm concerned with terrorists using Turkey as grounds to attack Israelis. I think that's just a small example of this can happen. Yes, Turkey did not receive what it wanted from Europe and the States and is taking a side. Sadly, they're taking the wrong one.
That's right. Well, we'll have to continue this. How can people, I personally have followed Alma for many years now, but how can they get in touch with Alma, and where can they go to support the research work of Alma?
So Israel-alma.org is our site. We're all over social media, on X, on Facebook. Instagram is a little less research oriented. If you're interested in geopolitics, then mostly on X. And we have a newsletter that you can subscribe to, a weekly newsletter speaking about the threats of the Shiite axis on Northern Front and all around.
Okay. Well, I highly recommend that everyone to go to that. Avraham, I so appreciate you taking the time today. Hopefully
pleasure.
we can do this again in the near future as the situation unfolds. It's to say that it's complex is an understatement. So thank you, and appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
You're always invited.
Thank you.